Hey everyone, welcome back to Room 237, and I have another true crime, mafia, mob film review. And this is a video that could possibly go on forever, because this one, out of all the gangster movies in my collection video, I'd have to say this one is my absolute favorite. And that is Scorsese's 1990 classic, GoodFellas. I love this movie to death. This, to me, is a perfect film. And yes, I will say, while technically Godfather Part 2 is more of an epic, it's much, it's more like a fine art epic. I just really like the honesty of this film, you know, being a fan of true crime as well, how just unflinching and honest this movie is. I like how this is pretty much the first movie, really, or the first big one, that most gangster flicks, Godfather, Scarface, even the Untouchables, really focus on, like, the top of the pyramid figures in the mafia. Whereas this was more street-level associates, the guys that got their hands dirty, the ones that really committed the crimes. You could say Scorsese did something similar earlier in the 70s with Mean Streets, which I do like Mean Streets, I really do, but it's fucking Goodfellas. Of course, it's based on the 1985 nonfiction book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, which I'm in the process of reading now. And it chronicles the rise and fall of a mob associate named Henry Hill, who was involved with the mafia about the mid-50s to about 1985-ish. Yeah, I think it was 85 was when he became an informant. So Hill is the central character, played by Ray Liotta. And actually, before I get into that, so not only is this my favorite gangster flick, it's my favorite film by Scorsese. I mean, if anyone was to say what's the one Scorsese movie I should watch, I'll say Goodfellas. Now, it's not my favorite Robert De Niro film. That would be Taxi Driver, which is also Scorsese. But De Niro in this, even though he's at the center on the cover, he's really a supporting role. This is a Ray Liotta vehicle. And sort of what's typical with these rise and fall movies is there's not really a central plot. It literally just is the rise and the fall. It's sort of how he became a government witness or informant by the mid-80s and sort of took down his whole crew and went into witness protection. Has a great cast. I mean, obviously you got Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. Probably my favorite on-screen duo. Raging Bull, this, Casino, which will be one of my next reviews, which I consider to be a sister film to this, which in fact, and yes, I bought it used, that's why it looks like that, but the Pileggi book, which came out after the movie, finally came in yesterday, so I'm excited to read that after Wise Guy. So, while it really, I guess if you had to give this movie a plot, it's the original tagline, which is 30 years of life in the mob. That's really what this movie is. The characters of Henry Hill and his wife Karen are the only ones that have the same first and last name. Everyone else has had their last name changed. Like, Paul Vario is Paul Cicero, played by Paul Sorvino. Jimmy the Gent Burke is now Jimmy the Gent Conway, played by Robert De Niro. Tommy DeSimone is now Tommy DeVito, played by Joe Pesci. Although I think Samuel L. Jackson has a bit role in this as Stax Edwards, which was the guy's real name. And I think some of the other more supporting roles are more, I think they're more like composite characters. Although I do know that Anthony Frenchie, they're all guys that actually existed and they go by the same name. But this movie really just shows how good of a director and just how well Scorsese understands film. Because even though this movie is perfect to begin with, originally, it was just going to play chronologically. It was going to open up. It was going to show Henry as a 12 or 13-year-old seeing the Cicero crew across the street at their cab stand and just idolizing them for their clothes, their money, their flashy rings and watches and cars, always had beautiful women around him, while his dad was a lower middle class hard worker. And it was just going to go on from there, how he started working at the cab stand and the pizza shop and worked his way into being an associate. But Scorsese knew that there needed to be some kind of hook. There had to be something to get the audience. So that's why we have the opening with, we hear like the whoosh of cars driving by. And we're in a car with Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro, and Joe Pesci. And they hear this pounding and this thumping, and they're like, the hell is that? Then they pull over, they open the trunk. There's a bloody guy in there who's still alive. And then Joe Pesci stabs him a bunch of times, and they shoot him. That's when Ray Liotta goes to shut the trunk. When he shuts it, there's like this, like, close-up. It's like, for as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. And that was the hook. So it's like right there we got, which not only is that, okay, that's the kind of lifestyle these guys have, but that is also, we go back in time and then we catch up to it. That's about the midpoint of the film. That's when everything changes for all three of them. That's, after that, their life gets more dangerous. They're not, I guess, on easy street or living the high life anymore because, well, I'll get into it as it goes. But the casting is perfect. The whole first portion, which there is a lot of voiceover narration by Ray Liotta. And a lot of the voiceover is stuff from this book. And another thing that's good about this, or I haven't said anything yet, a good thing about this book that translates to the film very well is it's not just storytelling voiceover. It is the voice and personality of Henry Hill. He tells it the way he, like, there's the F-bombs in there, his analogies, and just the way he explains things is all throughout the voiceover. Which, when I talk about this movie, I'll talk about voiceover because I think it was used very well in this to tell a story, whereas it seemed a bit excessive in Casino, but I'll talk about that when I get to Casino. And I want to get the young actor's name who played young Henry. Should have done this earlier. Or, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Oh, wait. Okay, that's something else. Oh, young Henry. Why is he... Christopher Sarone. He looks like a young Ray Liotta. So they did great with that. It explains, like, who Paul... I keep wanting to say Vario, because that's his real name. But, Paul Sorvino did a great job playing this just very intimidating, powerful mob boss. I mean, their crew is part of the Luccesse family, which is one of the 5 families of the New York Mafia. But Vario or Cicero is more like a captain or a capo. So even though, like, Luccesse boss is here, Vario or Cicero is, like, down here. He has his own, like, he's the boss of his own crew. We don't ever really see any Luccasses in this whole movie, which I thought was interesting. It really focuses on the street level guys. It's very intimate with that, which at that time it was very different because it always had this very almost fairy tale quality of like a king, basically. And here it's the guys on the street. The real Henry Hill was paid, I think it was $480,000 2 weeks prior to shooting to be a close consultant on this film. He was actually still in witness protection while this was being filmed. It was very dangerous for him to be in New York. The real Paul Vario had passed away at this point, but the real life Jimmy Burke was still alive in prison. He was the one that was really putting the multi-million-dollar hit on Henry Hill in real life up until he died in 96. So, I mean, yeah, I could just go through the whole plot, but I mean, what can I say about the plot that hasn't already been said? It shows, you know, it goes through different points of time, like, I think it shows 1955, then 63, 65, 70. You know, it just keeps working its way up to the mid-80s, and it shows, you know, how this crew, they make their money by hijacking trucks out of the Kennedy airport. Like, a truck would be coming through, they would hijack it. A lot of times they would have cartons of cigarettes, razor blades, lobsters, which that was their top 2 best sellers, fur coats. And a lot of times the driver would just get out, toss them the keys, so it would look like a steal or a hijacking, but they were actually in on it. And we're introduced to Robert De Niro. He's the kind of guy that just, like, the narration, it says, like, he would give the door guy $20 for holding the door. He would give the bartender $20 for keeping the ice cubes cold. Just always shoving 20s in people's pockets. And it was that kind of lifestyle that was really enthralling to Henry. The movie makes it really feel like Henry Hill was really loving the mob lifestyle, and whenever he would go to jail, they'd come back out, he would do whatever he could to get back on top. And even at the end of the film, when it shows him in witness protection, it's almost like a lamentation. He even says, I live the rest of my life like a schnook. You know, almost like it sucks. When in real life, Henry Hill tries several times to get out of the mafia. Because once he got past the clothes, the cars, the women, the money, and he saw how dangerous it was, it scared the hell out of him. I mean, he joined the military in the early 60s. He kept trying to distance himself, but he just kept getting pulled back in. Godfather 3 quote, pull me back in. This movie doesn't go into any of that, but the real life Henry Hill said everyone played their part perfectly. And I mean, Joe Pesci, who, the guy's like 5'3", 5'4". The real Tommy was over 6 feet. And he was, you know, a loose cannon psychopath. And Henry Hill said, other than the size difference and the physicality, Joe Pesci nailed Tommy. And this is one of Joe Pesci's most iconic roles. He won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. In fact, this came out the same year as Home Alone. You know, just the really wild, loud, violent, loose cannon killer gangster that Joe Pesci is known for. I don't remember, because he did do a lot of comedies and stuff in the 80s, but I don't know if it was like this and Casino that came after that really gave him that reputation. But yeah, just a lot of scenes where he just explodes. In fact, one scene that was improvised, which is probably one of the biggest scenes of the whole movie, is once we catch up to, or like once the fully grown Ray Liotta, Henry Hill story takes place, there's this great sequence with Joe Pesci as Tommy telling the story about someone giving him a hard time and, you know, getting in a fight with him. And he's facing Henry, and there's all these guys sitting around the table. And Henry says, you know, you're a funny guy. And he starts off like smiling, like, what do you mean I'm funny? Like, funny how? And Ray Liotta doesn't really, he's like, no, just the way you tell the story. It just keeps going. Like, no, how am I funny? It just keeps building and building until eventually it's like dead silent. And he's just like, get the fuck out of here, Tommy. And they start laughing. What's great about that scene and why Scorsese is such a genius is because actually his editor, who's edited all of his films since, I think, Raging Bull, Thelma Schoonmaker, she teaches a film class, and she says everyone asks why this scene is not in close-ups. And the reason why it's not, why it's in a mid-shot and we see the table and the rest of the people sitting there, is because Scorsese wanted to catch the evolution of everyone's dread. Like, in the beginning of the scene, everyone's laughing and smiling, and slowly you just see it die down. And you see the smiles go away, and the dread and the tension build. And it just makes that scene open up so much more. And that was based on a real-life event that happened to Joe Pesci while he was either a busboy or a waiter at some restaurant when he was much younger. But it was something that happened to him. One of the best scenes in the whole movie. Another great thing that Scorsese's always been great at is putting music and songs to certain scenes. And one rule he's always had is if he's doing a movie that's a real story, he will not use any music that came out before whatever scene is taking place. So it's like when we see them in the 60s, he won't use, even if it's 1963, he won't use a song from 1964. It throws off the realism. This has got to be my favorite Martin Scorsese soundtrack. I mean, there's probably more songs in Casino and Wolf of Wall Street, but there's not as many scenes of just where the music goes so perfectly. Like, I'll say in Casino, my favorite, like, he usually has, like, a scene with, like, a whole song or most of a song that brings us through this whole montage or scene. There's two in this I can think of, and then there's usually, like, a great shot with the song put over it. Like in Casino, it would be the mob killing off all witnesses to House of the Rising Sun. That's my favorite part of Casino. With this, my favorite scene that's put to a song will be when Henry and Karen go on their first real date. And he takes her to the Copacabana. And the line is very long. So he takes her to the back entrance. And it is this uncut, one single take tracking shot, this panning shot, all through the bowels of this club. The back entryway, the kitchen, the back corridors, the back, way into the club itself. It is put to, and then he kissed me by the crystals. And I mean, every little tiny thing is put to a certain cue. Like when they finally get to the club itself, the dining room, and it pans over and there's a guy carrying a table with the cloth that's waving, is when it gets to, I guess, like the keyboard solo or the synth part, or whichever part that is towards the end. And I mean, I just love that tracking shot. Like, I'm always a sucker for tracking shots or panning shots. But then, of course, there's also the famous sequence to all the bodies popping up. Because in 1978, I believe it was December 11th, I know that because that's my brother's birthday. 1978 or 79, there was the Latanza Heist, which was this huge, it was the biggest unrecovered cash robbery on American soil at that time. December 11th, 1978, where $5.8 million, which is equivalent to $23 million in 2019, was stolen. With $5 million of that was in cash, the rest was in jewelry. And it was this big heist from Latanza Airport. It was an airport, right? The Latanza vault at the JFK airport. Okay. And so, of course, De Niro is getting more and more paranoid, but also greedy. So he's having all these guys that were involved killed off. And we get this great montage of all the bodies popping up, put to the end instrumental outro to Layla by Derek and the Dominoes. Just opens up with that front grill of, I think it was that Cadillac. Camera just pans up and we see the dead, bloody couple in the front seats. Some of it's slow motion, like when they show Carbone, who's in the back of a meat truck. Like when that one part of the music is like, it's like the doors opening and then it goes inside to him frozen. It's put together so perfectly. But my favorite shot of the film, that's also put to music, but even without music, is there's this character named Maury, who at first screwed Jimmy over with some sum of money. And Jimmy gets really pissed. So then when Latanza comes, Jimmy is stalling on giving Maury his cut. And he keeps hassling Jimmy for it. And there's this great scene where Henry tells him just to kind of back off. You'll get your money eventually. And he's just walking out of a bar, and Robert De Niro as Jimmy is just kind of sitting at the bar watching him walk out. And then you get this great shot of him just puffing on a cigarette, watching him with just this look of, conspiring murder on his face, while the opening riff to Sunshine of Your Love is playing. So it's just like this. Robert De Niro's never looked more of a badass than in that shot. It's my favorite shot. I want to take a minute to talk about the violence, because I think I've said this before. There's a difference between violence and gore. And like when I think of the most like goriest movies ever, you could have something like really over the top, like Peter Jackson's Dead Alive, or Evil Dead films, or even more recent and realistically like the Saw films. That's all well and good, but that's just gory. It's not really impactful. It doesn't pack a punch to it. Whereas movies like these two are some of the most violent I've ever seen. I mean, excuse me. Actually, first time I ever saw this, it was on cable. It was on A&E. I wanted to see it. I knew it was going to be butchered, but I watched it anyway. It didn't cut any of the violence out. Like, yeah, the dialogue was really butchered, because I think this is in like the top 5 most instances of the word fuck in a scripted movie. But I saw it on cable and I still loved it. I went out and bought it the next day, actually. I actually had it on a DVD that you had to flip because it was an old one. So then I went out and got this. But there's a scene when Henry and Karen first start dating. And he's sort of introduced to this guy that lives across the street from her. And then one day he gets a call while Jimmy is roughing up Maury to give him money. He gets a call from Karen. He rushes out to her, and she's crying, saying that that guy from across the street, she was hanging out with him, and he got really rough and grabby and kicked her out of the car. So then he parks at her house, sends her inside, grabs his .38 snub nose, walks across the street where that guy is washing his Corvette with his friends, and he just grabs the guy by the shirt and just pistol whips him right on the face like a dozen times. I mean, you can hear the metal hitting bone every time he does it. I mean, it does, like, literally like a dozen times, and then he's like, I swore on my mother, you ever come near her again, you're dead. Then he hits him one final time. That scene is way more impactful. It's not very bloody. You just see the blood kind of run down his face, and it's not even up close. It's sort of in like a mid shot. And then you just see the bloody pistol up close when he gives Karen the gun. I will argue that is way more violent than any slasher or Saw movie. Because, yeah, gore can be intense, but when it is just realistic, raw violence, it sticks with you a lot more. I mean, you can just hear the metal hitting the bridge of that guy's nose. And then, of course, there's the scene in, I believe it's 1970, June of 1970, which is the scene that it opens up with. We've caught up to it. The murder of Billy Batts, played by Frank Vincent. In real life, Billy Batts was a main man, part of the Gambino family, close friend of John Gotti. He had done a 6-year sentence, I think, for racketeering and extortion. I could be wrong on that, but he served 6 years. While he was in jail, Jimmy took over one of his rackets. And then when he got out, there was a welcome home party at this lounge that Henry owned. And it was there that there's that famous scene where there's Henry, Tommy, and Jimmy. Then Frank is there. Tommy shows up, and Billy's giving him crap about going home to get his shine box, because when he was a kid, he was shine shoes, and now he's much bigger than that. So then just they kind of get over it and make up, and then he just like, now go home and get your fucking shine box. Tommy gets really pissed. Later on that night, Jimmy and Tommy just pistol whip, kick, beat him, they think, to death. In real life, that incident happened at a different club, where they think it was because he wanted his racket back from Jimmy. Jimmy wasn't going to give it up. So, and that was where he insulted Tommy. So then they planned his murder at Henry's club sometime later. But in the movie, it all just condenses it to his welcome home party at Henry's club. And I'll say, yeah, the kicks, like the straight down kicks by Jimmy are kind of sloppy. It doesn't look super realistic, but think about what they're doing to this guy. Yeah, it's pretty intense. Throw him in the trunk. They go to get a shovel at Tommy's mother's house. His mother is played by Scorsese's mother, Catherine. Very sweet actress. She's been in a number of his movies. She's also in Casino. He takes a knife, shovel, and then they go... In the movie, he says upstate, but in real life, I think it was in Pennsylvania. And that's where the opening of the film is. They realize that he's still alive. They have to kill him, then bury him. And then actually later on in the film, they had to go dig him back up. 6 months have gone by. They realize that land's going to be made into condos, so they got to get rid of the body again. But the reason why that's where everything changes for those three characters is because Billy Batts is the made man. For those that don't know, to be made means you've done enough, long enough, and been trusted enough to be taken in as part of the family. You can move up, become a boss eventually. And sort of like a saying, you have it made. No one can fuck with you. You're part of this crew. The only way you can kill a made guy is if you go to the proper heads of the crew, bosses, and you get permission. It has to be a good enough reason, and enough people have to essentially vote on it. And the maid ceremony is, there's usually like a blood oath and some swearing, some oath. And Billy Batts was made, Tommy was not, and Henry and Jimmy can't be made because they're both Irish. They haven't, like even Henry says in voiceover, doesn't matter that my mother was a Sicilian. He has Irish in him. You have to be 100% Italian to be made. So you have these three guys that killed a made man. So from that point on, that's, it's when things change and things start getting heated. Of course, it shows Henry and Jimmy. Well, it doesn't show Jimmy's prison, but it shows Henry when he goes to jail and how they live like kings. They got their own room with like a stove and steak and lobsters, alcohol, robes. Henry starts selling pills and narcotics to get by. Then when he gets out, Paulie tells him to quit because they frown upon that. He doesn't. He loves the money too much. He gets Tommy and Jimmy in on it. Which, if you look, when they go to meet their probation officers, Jimmy's probation officer that asks if he has his pay stub is Tobin Bell. It's Jigsaw. And then we get to the part where there's the Latanza Heist, the great scene where Jimmy's giving everyone crap for spending too much too soon. Samuel L. Jackson plays Stax, who is the getaway driver. He parked the getaway van in front of a hydrant at his girlfriend's house where he got stoned and fell asleep. They got a thumbprint. So then Tommy had to go kill him. Very bloody pistol shot to the back of the head with a silencer. But cool young cameo by Samuel L. Jackson. And then we find out Tommy's going to be made. And this is another thing the mob does, was they take him to the ceremony to get made, and when he walks in, there's nobody there. And he kind of yells, "Oh no," as if he knows what's going to happen. And the guy that shoots him is Tutti Cicero, or Tutti Vario, Paulie's younger brother. Because the mob will have you do that. If one of their guys kills one of yours without permission, they'll have you kill one of your own just as sort of like a sign of respect. So Tutti kills Tommy. And then we have the sequence that's known as Last Day as a Wise Guy, which is May of 1980. Which it starts at like 8 in the morning, goes all the way up to like 11 at night. And it just shows how Henry has to run all these errands, like bring silencers to Jimmy, pick his brother up from the hospital, go shopping with Karen, pick up some cocaine from his Pittsburgh guys, go to his girlfriend's house, basically. His girlfriend's house where she can cut and mix it, go home to start cooking dinner, go back out to pick it up, and then go back home and get his babysitter ready to fly with the cocaine. And the editing is so frantic because Henry is just coking it up nonstop to the point where, and they did a good job at making Ray Liotta looking coked out. You know, just pale, sweaty with the bags, his hair's all frazzled. And there's just all these rapid jump cuts, like throws the guns and silencers in the trunk. The camera like pans up, jumps up really fast while he shuts the trunk. Or like jumps from the trunk to the trash can where he's hiding them. Oh, and of course there's helicopters flying around that he's watching. He's all paranoid. Or like at home when he's making the meatballs and like he looks up and it's edited so it's like he looks up and then there's like a close-up of him doing it again. It's just this really frantic editing style that Scorsese used to show just the mindset of someone who's coked out. And of course that's when Henry finally gets in trouble. He gets sent to jail for cocaine. He gets out. He fears that Jimmy will have him killed because he could talk about Latanza. He could tell Paulie that Jimmy was in on cocaine with him. You have this great scene where Karen's talking to Jimmy and he tells her to go down to the store to get some dresses. And when she goes down there, it's all dark and there's guys in there. She gets freaked out and drives off. There's much debate over whether Jimmy was going to have her killed or not. Which also, in real life, there's a theory that Paulie had Tommy killed, not for Billy Bats, but because he tried to rape Karen while Henry was in jail the first time, which Paul Vario was having an affair with Karen, so that ticked him off. And also, voiceover says, from Henry, says that he was shot in the face so his mother couldn't have an open casket. In real life, there was no funeral. His body was never recovered. No one really knows who killed Tommy DeSimone. One of the most common theories that he was killed by John Gotti himself because of Billy Bats. But anyway. Yeah, it really does make it seem like Jimmy was going to have Karen killed. or this scene with Henry and Jimmy in this diner, about Jimmy sending Henry down to Florida to do something. And then there's this great freeze frame moment when Henry looks up and his eyes get big. And it says, Jimmy never asked me to do a hit alone before. And now he's asking me to go to Florida with Anthony. That's when I knew I wasn't going to come back from Florida alive. Which actually, that diner that they're sitting in is in a diner scene in The Irishman, actually. So, fun fact. And in this scene, you can really tell, and also the scene with Jimmy and Karen, Robert De Niro is really gray. This movie does a great job. I'll even say better than, well, I guess it's easier to make someone look older than younger. But, I mean, just with a little bit of gray in the hair and glasses, they do a wonderful job at aging. Mostly Paul Sorvino and Robert De Niro, 30 years. We will first see both of them, they got jet black hair. And then by the end of it, you know, all gray and white, big glasses. I mean, the de-aging in The Irishman looks all right. It's mostly pretty seamless. Sometimes it's but the aging in this, it looks very simple, but it's very effective. Especially just that scene in the diner when De Niro was just all gray and white with those glasses. And so that's when Henry decides to become government witness, informant. And I will say this is one of the most hardest scenes to watch as far as like a betrayal goes. Which the two hardest scenes with the betrayal is in, for me personally, Godfather 2. It's going to sound silly, but I'm a huge fan. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And then a close third will be the courtroom scene in this, when Henry has to point out Paul Cicero and Jimmy Conway. Because it sort of ends and begins sort of learning a lesson and then defying that lesson to stay alive. And that's kind of one of the big things about this film is if you want to get out of this life, there's only 3 outcomes. Death, prison, hiding. There's really no other way out of it. So like in the beginning, when Henry is 12 or 13 and he gets arrested and then he gets off, Jimmy kind of takes him in his arm. He's like, I'm proud of you. You took your first pinch like a man and you learned the 2 most important rules in life. When Henry asks what that is, he says, with a great upward close-up of Robert De Niro, never rat on your friends, always keep your mouth shut. And then 2.5 hours later, we're in a courtroom with Henry testifying and pointing out by name Paul Cicero and Jimmy Conway. And pretty much spilling everything so he could get immunity and be put in the witness protection. Which also, the scene where Paulie tells him to stay away from the drugs after he gets out of jail the second time. He talks about this other boss who his guy got involved with selling drugs. Now he's put in jail. He's going to die, 71 years old. He's like, I'm not having that. And at the end of the film, the caption says, you know, Paul, I think it says Paul Cicero instead of Paul Vario, but it says he died at the age of, I think, 70, shortly before this was made. I think 1989 or 88. And then it said, you know, Jimmy is still serving his life sentence, but there's still a hit on Henry's life. Sorry, I'm clearing my throat so much. Of course, Jimmy died in 96. But right before the end, you know, it shows this sort of developmental housing, suburbia, and voiceover with Henry says, you know, I asked for this sort of, you know, fancy pasta with marinara. I got, you know, elbow noodles and ketchup. So I had to live the rest of my life like a schnook as he kind of looks at the camera. Then we just get a flash of Tommy with his pistol, like, shooting. I guess to show that the threat is still out there, but I'm sure there's multiple ways to take that. One thing that is interesting is all these guys you can read a bunch on. I mean, this is all about Henry's life right here, and I'm not that far into it, but it's already a great read. In the very beginning, while Henry is introducing us into this world, he talks about just how private Paulie is. Like, he says he doesn't have any phones in the house. He has guys running from the phone to him to back to the phone, even for a yes or no answer. He never answers people directly. He always has people running back and forth for verbal answers. And that's very true. Paul Vario was a very private man. And I mean, in that regard, he was very successful because in any of these mafia encyclopedia books or any of these reference books, there's not really any chapters on Paul Vario. Or at least, like, mafia encyclopedias before a certain year. I still don't think there is any. But, yeah, most mafia encyclopedias don't have a chapter on Paul Vario because he was just so private. And there hasn't really been too many photographs of him taken, really. Other than, like, his mug shots or, like a few from a distance, but very blurry. But yeah, I absolutely love this movie. I cannot think of any flaws with this. If I had to look at, like, top favorite movies outside of horror, this would be in my top 5, possibly even my top 3. This is a movie that I can just put in and, 1, kill 2.5 hours, and 2, just be totally immersed and completely entertained by it. And there's always some sort of shot or music cue or something that I missed before, which that was another thing I meant to talk about with the music. Like, it starts off with that sort of 40s, 50s sort of showroom, ballroom, like Italian singer music. And then we get, like, rock and roll from the 70s. And it ends with a Ramones song, actually, during the end credits. So we just get that evolution of music as well as with the mob as everyone's aging. All the performances are great. I know a lot of people from this ended up going on to be in The Sopranos. Most notably, Lorraine Bracco, who plays Karen. She's a main character in The Sopranos. What's that actor's name who played Spider? Michael Imperioli, who plays Chris in The Sopranos. He plays the young bartender Spider, who Tommy shoots in the foot to get him to dance. Then the next day tells him to go fuck himself, and then he kills him. Frank Vincent, I know, is in The Sopranos. There's been a number of people. But, just such a great movie. And when Scorsese read this book, so I mean, Scorsese grew up in Little Italy. He saw all this mob activity, and he was always fascinated by it. And when he read the book, he thought that was the most honest, unflinching portrayal of mob life, and he was like, that's the movie I've always wanted to make. So him and Pileggi actually got together, co-wrote the screenplay together, and I think they had a good working relationship because then they got back together for Casino. And Casino I do consider to be a sister film to this. You have Scorsese at Pileggi. It takes place around the same time. Got a De Niro and Pesci again. But I do have more negatives to say about this film, but that's when I get to Casino. But And yeah, I will say the first two Godfathers, especially the second one, is a much bigger, more epic film. The scope is much grand than this. But this is the kind of story I like more. It's just, I really like the rooted, street level kind of stories. And I can't think of one flaw for this movie. I mean, it is expertly directed, expertly acted. It was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. I think it only won Best Supporting Actor for Joe Pesci, which he does deserve. But actually, what did it lose? I have to look that up and say it on here. Why? Oh, it doesn't even say what year. Like what? Like the 80th or whatever Academy Awards. And also, just like the Scorsese-isms that he's known for, like freeze frames or tracking shots or voiceover. You know, it's all prevalent in here. I love his use of music. I mean, every song. I mean, I could even say Casino and maybe even The Departed would have, and Wolf of Wall Street, will have songs that don't quite fit, at least for me personally. But with this, every song fits perfectly, especially in that He Kissed Me, with that back entryway into the club with that, probably my favorite tracking shot of any movie other than Danny on the big wheel in The Shining. Then, of course, the montage of the dead bodies put to Layla, or just that shot of Jimmy conspiring to kill Maury with just that look on his face with Sunshine of Your Love. And Scorsese did say he wanted this to be like a whole movie of the mafia, like no real plot or story, just a bunch of, you know, day-to-day shit, no day-to-day life. This does it expertly. And I'll say this is one of the more violent films because its violence does stick with you. That scene where he's just pistol whipping the guy's fucking bridge of his nose. Way more violent than any horror film. Because I always say the difference between violence and gore. I love this movie to death. This to me is a perfect, perfect film. And it's my favorite mafia film by far. And I mean, yes, I will say the first two are better. Probably better made and just more epic. But this, I don't really want to say it's more entertaining. I don't really know how to word it, but yeah, the first two, especially the second one, is more epic. It does have a bigger scope. Hell, I'll even say this is more epic. Well, those are epic films, obviously, but, you know, this is more my kind of mafia film. It feels so big for being street level guys. It's unflinchingly intimate with just what these guys go through and what they do to each other. And I am really enjoying the book as I'm reading that. So I'm very excited to read Casino after I read that. But I also still got a bunch of comics to go through and talk about. But yeah, it's almost been an hour, but I told you it was going to be a lengthy video because... And I might have not even covered everything I want to talk about with this movie. Because I love it so much, I love every aspect about it. I probably could have gone more in depth with real life versus, you know, what's in this. But it is fairly close. I mean, Henry Hill died in 2012. But you know, he was very closely involved with the making of this. Frank Culotta will say that Billy Batts actually being alive in the trunk was an event taken from his life, not Billy Batts, but, you know, popping open the trunk, guy still being in there, having to stab him and shoot him to death. He will say that Scorsese got that from him for GoodFellas. I always associate it with these guys, but GoodFellas, perfect movie. Love it to death. Favorite mafia film. Favorite Ray Liotta film. This is my favorite Joe Pesci performance. Robert De Niro really does take a supporting back seat to this. It really lets Liotta and Pesci shine. But when he does have a seat, he does kind of steal it. And he is a badass to watch. I just got to stop because I might go on for another hour. But GoodFellas, great movie, perfect movie, favorite mafia film. Love it. Thank you for watching.